Thank you very much, Helena, and thanks to OCAMPR for the opportunity to come and share some of our thoughts and work that has been carried along a continuum. And what we'd like to go through today would be a couple of rather brief presentations and leave plenty of opportunity for discussion. We also have some resources to share, and Kimberly Peacock will make these resources available to you. But there's a caregiver's companion that's been developed for the families and practitioners within the DoD that certainly has its applicability in the civilian community as well. Have nothing to disclose. Overall, what we'd like to be able to go through today, and thank you, Father John, for a fantastic segue into what we're going to talk about here today, about how to deal with death and dying as it relates to injured patients. And as Father John had pointed out, it's a continuous process, right? It culminating in death. As Father John had said, life is a continuum culminating in the same event for all of us. And for those that work in this healthcare field, that can be a very brief period of time from entry of that patient into the system, or it can be a very prolonged, lifelong experience. And Kimberly is going to touch more on the latter. My specialty is in injury care, and it certainly claims the lives of so many young people. We'll get into some of those demographics and talk about some of the ways to deal with that. Injury in this country is a terrible problem. About 190,000 people died last year related to injury. There have been 9 million falls, 3 million car crashes in the continental United States alone, 30,000 gunshot deaths in this country. Injury is the leading killer of those under the age of 45, and in fact kills more under the age of 45 than the next 5 causes of death combined. And there's some features about injury that really comes as a shock and a surprise to folks that makes it that much more difficult to deal with overall. The state of Texas, no stranger to this. Nearly 5,000 people will die on the highways of Texas this year in car crashes. That's more soldiers than have been killed in Iraq and Afghanistan throughout the entire conflict. 1 year, one state, one mechanism. And we don't think twice about getting in that car and turning on the engine and going to the store. You might want to think twice about that. This map represents what the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC in Atlanta, considers too high a mortality per capita. So 50 per 100,000 deaths due to injury. And what I would draw your attention to is that here, is that going to show up? Yeah. This little island of gray is where San Antonio is, and everything around San Antonio is red. So too high a mortality from injury, and this is it's a huge problem to have to deal with. When people die from injury, most die within the immediacy of the injury. And these are fatal injuries. The second peak is why we have EMS, 911, why trauma centers exist, why nurses and pathologists and surgeons and emergency physicians, anesthesiologists, transfusion specialists exist, why we have a 911 system to respond to these potentially preventable causes of death. And as I say frequently to folks, not all of these individuals that come to us are innocent, shall we say, but they all have a mom or a child or a sibling, and so no matter how horrific the circumstances, it is our challenge to not only provide life-saving care to save the physiology of that patient, but compassionate care to that individual. And nothing gets more to that point than being in the combat zone and caring for the injured Marine and the injured person that was trying to kill the Marine at the same time, and choose to care for the injured other combatant over that of the Marine because their physiology demands it, that they're more badly injured. And so to find a way to provide compassionate care in that setting, caring for those who are trying to kill you, it takes on its own special sort of resiliency if you're going to get through that. And then it's this group of patients that linger in our intensive care units, and as again Father John had said, we have a rather fairly unlimited armamentarium of things we can do to keep that heart beating. Whether or not there's a person still there is I think debatable. But oftentimes these decisions come down to is not when the patient is ready to die, it's when their family is ready to accept their death. So when a patient comes in who's injured into our trauma center, their life literally hangs in the balance. And physiology and the physical needs of that patient trump everything else. Time is critical. And there's a certain emotional distance that one has in order to be able to focus on the things you need to do in the sequence in which you need to do them. And the patient actually becomes a rather sterile, inanimate object in the center of this hubbub of activity. And certainly there's precious little time to attend to the emotional, spiritual needs of that patient because physiology is what trumps all. So we've got about 15 minutes. The major cause of death once you get to the hospital still remains brain injury. The number one preventable cause of death is hemorrhage, bleed to death. When patients bleed to death, it takes less than 30 minutes to do so. And you don't have that much circulating blood volume in there. So we have about 15 minutes to figure out what's wrong, where it's gone wrong, and then to attempt to try to do something about it if we're going to have a living patient at the end of that encounter. And so the team has to come together, and unlike most team sports, it's not you who loses that game, it's the patient and their family who lose that game if your team does not perform well. And so just like any NFL team or NBA team, there's a pretty clear strategy laid out. We have manuals for this and courses that we teach people. We have algorithms and protocols that we follow to take the guesswork out of it that lines out what we need to do. And so that strategic plan that we use comes at the hands of people who own this. They are invested in this, and they show up day after day after day under unbelievable circumstances to care for people, and it's never dull. It's always at the exciting edge of things in terms of peak performance, continuously, day after day. Regardless of what might have happened this morning on your drive-in, or what's going on at home, or a distant family member has fallen ill, or there are other things that life is going on in the background for all of these folks. And it takes a certain amount of trust in your teammates in order to be able to do this and do this well. So this is a photo of a trauma center, and there are just 2 patients involved here. And what you can see, I think, from that image is that, in fact, that patient is somewhat of an inanimate object. They are poked, they are prodded, they are rolled, they are twisted, IVs are started, injections are given, and there's not much time to talk to that patient to explain things to them. Now, the injured patients, they want to live. And I've been asked this question 50 times, 100 times. Am I going to live? Or an emphatic statement, don't let me die. And it takes a certain amount of confidence to be able to reassure an individual that they are not going to die. Now, you don't know that they're not going to die because you don't control that necessarily. But if you do everything right, then it is their best chance. And they oftentimes will have a brain injury and or be intoxicated and have a very difficult time interacting with their environment and those in it. And so to have them perseverate on where am I, what's happened, where is my loved one, who you've now been reported by the police officers that there was a death in that vehicle as well, with this individual, and when is the right time to broach that with that person? When family members show up, parents of an injured child, for instance, and trying to explain things to them in a way that they can understand. At the same time, these unbelievable circumstances. Little Johnny was fine when I sent him to school this morning. How did he get hit by a car? And now you say you have to go and operate on him to save his life. It's just not believable to them. And dealing with that on a day-to-day basis can wear on those caregivers at that bedside. So the life-saving interventions take priority, and you don't really have the time, as I said, to interact with the patient. So it becomes emotionally draining to not be able to deal with those aspects of the care. So by its very nature, injury is sudden, unpredictable, and life-changing. And if you are a farmer in southern Minnesota whose farm has been in the family literally for generations, and you find yourself pinned under your tractor, your life has changed potentially forever. You might lose that farm and your family's entire livelihood. Who is going to bring in that crop that you worked so hard to put in the field in the first place? And now, as a person who has been taking care of your family for your entire life, you don't control anything anymore. In fact, if both your arms are broken, I would challenge you to do your own personal hygiene on a daily basis. Takes you back to that infancy, if you will, to lose all autonomy. There are patients that end up spending extra days in the hospital or going to a nursing care facility because it's simply too many steps up into their house, or they have a bathroom that's only on the second floor and they can't ascend the stairs to get to there. They have to recover more before they can even go home. And this can be painful on an intensive basis, not just emotionally, but physically painful. And so what this relies on is that the caregivers also are invested in this. They want these injured patients to live. They take great pride in it. They've dedicated themselves to it. They're highly trained. They exercise this on a daily basis. And therefore, burnout is a real issue for these folks. Who do they decompress to? Do you take this stuff home and talk with your family about it? My children were 12 to 15 years old before they ever realized what I did on a daily basis, because they didn't take it home. Home that's life. That's your family. That's. I don't go home to decompress. They decompress about the things that have gone on in their day. Therefore, a lot of these individuals don't last very long at this. The day shift, the night shift, the weekend shift, the holiday shift, missing birthdays and anniversaries and other special events such that your life is not your own. After a few years of doing this, you realize, boy, that Monday to Friday clinic job seems very attractive to me versus all of this stress day and night. And some of the folks that come to the bedside of the individuals that are well-meaning, particularly our social work colleagues, are so task-saturated with taking care of finances and arrangements that they find themselves unable or with no time to address the other needs that these patients have, that the real reason they went into social work in the first place. And debriefings of your team are rarely possible. In my my trauma center, we see somewhere on the order of about 40 patients per day. So not quite 2 an hour, but there's no time in between patients in order to decompress. And it can become quite challenging. So what I think is that key messages have to be delivered in a timely fashion, and it has to be done along the continuum of care. The conversations that I have with family members is very frank. I can't sugarcoat anything for you. Your loved one is injured. We don't know what all the injuries are yet. We'll catalog them. We'll treat them as they come up. I don't know if your loved one is going to live or not. And that stark truth to come out right from the beginning is really important to set the tenor and tone that this is truly life-saving care. And so the team plays a strong role in this, in allowing the family members to come to the bedside and explaining things in even better terms, as now they've had an opportunity for 20 minutes or an hour to come to terms with what has happened. Effectively communicating with those family members is, again, quite difficult. It's easy to get into technical jargon because that's what I would dictate in my note or write in orders, but now to put that into terms that the layperson can understand becomes additionally challenging. And we should, with our interdisciplinary teams, take care of the entire patient and the entire family, not just the physical needs. That becomes very challenging in the time-stressed environment. So breaking that bad news is a difficult thing, and unfortunately, in my line of work, working not only in the trauma center but in the intensive care unit, this is just another facet of life that we deal with and help patients and their families ease into death. And it is very challenging for many individuals. I will tell you that I've been back in San Antonio not quite 18 months now. 6 months before I got there, a young man was injured with multiple gunshots. He stayed in that same intensive care unit bed until 2 weeks ago when he died. 2 years in the hospital with one family member to assist, who would come about once a week and was obviously very, very fatigued. And at many intervals, this young man said, "I think I'm done. I don't think I can do this anymore." And this family member would come to his bedside and have a very frank conversation with him and encourage him, etc. Finally, it became apparent that we had run out of magic and we couldn't sustain his life any further. I will tell you that everybody in that intensive care unit was terribly affected by his death after years of investment of their time, energy, talent, skill to have that happen. At the same time, they were all relieved because they knew this was inevitable for this young man. It takes its toll on that team. So this is something new. This is going to be debuted next week in Chicago at the American College of Surgeons Trauma Quality Improvement Program. And this is End-of-Life Care 101, if you will. They try to make it surgeon-proof. People that have the hardest time, perhaps, dealing with some of this. But it talks about how to break bad news and what to say, and specifically what not to say, and how to go about things. And physicians aren't terribly good at this, quite honestly. This is where we rely on our chaplains and our social work teams to be there with us when we talk about patients who now have suffered such a bad injury that their brain is no longer functional, and by the state law they're technically dead. We go into the room and say things like, "Well, we still have them on life support." Wait, I thought you said they were dead. They're alive? I had a family member come to me in my fellowship in Philadelphia and had a very surprising, I never anticipated having this said to me, about a young man who had suffered a gunshot to the head, and his brain had ceased function, and we had declared him dead. And as we walked to his room, me and his mom, we passed by 5 other patients' beds. And when you walk into his room looks just like the others. There's a ventilator. There are monitors. They're flashing colors and numbers, and the chest is rising and falling. And the mother looks at me and says, I don't understand. Why is my son dead and none of those white boys are dead? Wow. Didn't have a great reply for that one, because that came out of left field to me, that in some way, shape, or form I had a built-in prejudice towards this family member because they weren't white. So add that to your list of things and sensitivities that you have to take into account when working in that environment, and it can become very, very difficult. And so again, we want to be empathetic. It's really something to have an entire family, to include children and grandchildren gathered at the bedside as they begin to mourn, and almost always it reverts into, but he had a good life. And we really enjoyed being with him. And those are the times that things are very, very rewarding in terms of seeing that family come to acceptance of their loved one's death. Communicating with the staff is just as important. This, in my world, is especially important when there's an injured child that dies in immediacy. Because it's very difficult on that staff. Most of these people are young. Most of them have young children, and these children remind them of their own. And to deal with them and let them know that you did everything you could have. There was nothing that could have been done to save this injured child's life is probably as important as anything else you can talk about in that moment with them. It becomes very difficult to deal with that with the families because these circumstances are absolutely unbelievable to them. So I think that we need to find better ways of integrating what all of us do in terms of chaplaincy and psychologically, from the social worker perspective, from the physician, nurse, psychologist perspective, to wrap around these injured patients and their family members because the circumstances are quite difficult for them. And resiliency of these caregivers that's the challenge. You have to take a respite from this in some way. You have to be able to decompress. You have to be able to get words of encouragement if you're going to continue to succeed in this field. And I think that it's vital that we have chaplains that are there not only for our patients, but for our team members as well. There are a number of references here I think that will make the talk available. And then if anybody has questions, there's contact information here for me. I'm going to turn this over to Helena and Kim, and then we'll have a question and answer session at the end.
While we get the slides up, I'd like to just introduce Dr. Kimberly Peacock, who is an enthusiastic and innovative researcher with extensive experience in the areas of curriculum development and training. She's been involved with military research concerning service members and their families at a military treatment facility for over 10 years. Her area of expertise is in the development of educational and training materials and curriculum development. She's conducted interventional studies and utilizes her knowledge of curriculum development to create projects focusing on maintaining the health and wellness of service members and their families. Dr. Peacock is a Gold Star wife, a former military child dependent, and most recently, a Marine mom. Dr. Peacock is passionate about improving the lives of military caregivers. She utilizes her skills in promoting healthy cooking, publishing her first cookbook, Put a Lid on It, to empower families to cook healthy and quick meals. She's also co-author of The Caregiver's Companion, a book that promotes self-care among military caregivers. She has vast experience teaching cooking classes to an array of audiences, including service members, military caregivers, high school students, and local television audiences. She's an advocate for healthy eating with a strong belief that food is medicine. She believes people deserve to experience health and well-being by practicing a healthy lifestyle. Dr. Peacock earned a BS in psychology from Texas Christian University, an MS in counseling and human development from Troy State University, and a Doctor of Education in educational leadership from the University of Southern California. Please welcome Dr. Peacock.
But it's a pleasure, truly a pleasure to be here with you today, and I appreciate Dr. Jenkins inviting me and giving me this opportunity. Let me twist this around here. So originally, this was the team that we work with to make this happen, and I too have no disclosures. So I do want to say that the slides that I'm going to present today are based on another booklet that Roxana Delgado, and I will introduce her in just a moment, my colleague that I've been working with for over 10 years, that we've developed, and we're currently waiting for publication on that. Let me back up one. So our story. As it was mentioned in the introduction, I am a Gold Star family member. For those that don't know that term, means that I lost my husband in Desert Storm, so 26 years ago. It was a knock at the door, and as it said earlier, I'm a military child dependent. My father was a chaplain in the United States Army for 34 years. So I received that knock at the door. If you watch the movies, it's kind of like that. Two uniformed officers standing at my door, with my father being a chaplain, knowing what the notifications were about, what that looked like. I knew when I opened the door. They weren't there to tell me TJ had been injured. So TJ was larger than life. I have to write this down because sometimes if I don't follow my script, 26 years later, still get a little emotional. But TJ was larger than life. He was compassionate and kind, incredibly strong, both physically and mentally. Soldiers like TJ should surely be immortal. He should grow old with me and then die peacefully, surrounded by friends and family that love him, not in the middle of a desert. It was impossible for me to conceive that he was gone, much less reconcile that this was now my life, a life without him. My grief was public, something that was watched on TV and read in the newspaper. At the time, TJ was the highest ranking officer to lose his life in Desert Storm, and he was the first military physician. TJ was an anesthesiologist. Through all of it, I felt it couldn't be real. They had the wrong soldier. As the world moved on, I desperately wanted time to stand still. Grief does that. It turns the world upside down and inside out, and nothing feels quite right. That was 26 years ago. Fast forward, a little over 10 years ago, I met this beautiful woman by the name of Roxana Delgado. We both worked for the same employer, Samueli Institute, which was a nonprofit based in the D.C. area, and they did military medical research. I was embedded at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio. Roxana was embedded at William Beaumont out in El Paso. We were colleagues. We had the same jobs, just different military treatment facilities. In 2009, so Roxana's husband, Victor Medina, Sergeant First Class Victor Medina, his convoy was hit by a roadside bomb. He survived, but Roxana immediately became, with a phone call, a caregiver, a military caregiver. That's where it may be a little different in our military family. When we received the notification that our loved one has either been killed in the line of duty or injured, oftentimes we're alone. We're not surrounded by other family members because the military now has become our family, and we're often relocated someplace else. Roxana's call happened at 4 o'clock in the morning during the week. She was away, actually in Colorado, on a research assignment that we were doing when she received the call. I had just returned from a support group at Fort Hood, Texas, at our local chapel, and it was a Sunday evening. I had just returned from a group of 54 ladies whose husbands were deployed. We were called the COWS, the Circle of Waiting Spouses. And my whole thought, we're good at acronyms. My whole thought was, out of all those women, many of their husbands were infantry. And I remember sitting in group that night thinking, whose husband isn't coming home? Never thinking it was my TJ. And so Roxana, when she began her path, and we began to look at this and talk, we shared so many virtual coffees, so many long-distance coffees. And so I always say that when we do these presentations, I want to invite each of you to my kitchen table. I have had many laughs, many tears, many decisions made at my kitchen table over a nice cup of coffee. Some of you may prefer tea, and we can do that as well. But the reason why I like to set our presentations up that way is because I want this to be a conversation between friends. Because conversations continue, workshops end, and we don't want this conversation about our military veteran caregivers to end. We need to continue this conversation. So with that, Roxana and I always like to acknowledge who these presentations are really about. So we want to dedicate this presentation to the 5.5 million Americans, the hidden heroes, who care for our wounded, ill, and injured military service members and veterans of the pre- and post-9/11 eras. May your cup runneth over with joy, love, and laughter. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on our military veteran caregiver. How we define it is anyone who provides assistance to wounded, ill, and injured service members or veterans. It may be a spouse. It may be a parent. We're seeing a lot of our parents doing this. It could be a friend. It could be a neighbor. RAN was commissioned by the Elizabeth Dole Foundation. They have the Hidden Heroes campaign. But they were in 2014, to look at the military caregivers. And they found that that's where this number, 5.5 million caregivers, come from. And we know that 20% of those are post-9/11. Post-9/11 veterans are mostly assisted by their spouses, 33%, and parents, 25%. And we also know that there is very limited evidence on military caregiving, but not now, because Roxana Delgado has entered the scene. And we are in the process, under her direction, we're conducting the first military veteran caregiver health outcome study. We had 467 caregivers complete our survey from April to July of this year. And we found that the military caregivers participating in our study presented similar features described in the RAND report. And we're looking at their health outcomes. Much of the research that has been done, very little of it, has looked a lot at the veteran that they're taking care of, but we haven't looked at who that caregiver is. What do they look like? So if you look at our slide, what hopefully kind of stands out to you is the age. These are young caregivers, and I will talk a little bit more about that in some subsequent slides. What do we know about caregiving? From the informal caregiver standpoint, we know that their tasks and responsibilities produce a heavy burden. We know that it impacts their physical and emotional health. It's pretty alarming what we're seeing right now in some of our data, the diagnosis that these young caregivers are being given. And when I say young, the average age of when they begin this caregiving journey is the age of 28. And they are caring for complex morbidities, and many of them have 4 to 5 diagnoses that they're caring for with their veteran. We also know that post-9/11 caregivers save the government about $3 billion, and pre-9/11 save the government about $10.6 billion. This was supposed to be my icebreaker. You guys probably can't see my ship there, but we're going to kind of pass over that due to the time here. So I'm going to get into what is going to hopefully be a booklet here soon that we can share with you, and this is what I talk about that Roxana and I have written together, and we call it A Cup of Comfort. It's a caregiver's hug in a cup. And what will make it a little bit different is because of my love for cooking, we're also going to include recipes with each of our chapters for our caregivers that they can put in a cup. So we kind of, in doing this, and it would have made a little sense if I'd done the icebreaker, but in looking at the caregiver journey, or in looking at the journey of a tragedy, a trauma that's happened, and the person doesn't make it, we kind of look at Roxanne and I looked at the similarities in the emotions or the stages that we went through. We both are asked repeatedly, because we see such similarities, how did we get through that? Well, I don't know that it's something that has an end. I think it's a journey that we continue. It's a continuum. And I will say, no doubt about it, if I hadn't had my faith, and Roxanne would say the same, I wouldn't be here today. And I know that. Like I said, I came from the medical community 26 years ago. Things were a little different. And people had the best of intentions. I was offered things to help me sleep, things to help clear my foggy head, things to help me remember, things to help give me energy, all with the best of intentions. And there were days that it physically hurt to open my eyes. It physically hurt to breathe. And so there were days I did contemplate, let's just end this. I can't do this. But it was my faith. And I found myself going to the cross. But as we go through these slides, what I would like us to remember when we're working with family caregivers is that somehow we have to help them see that we don't stay at the cross. Our story doesn't end there. We have Easter Sunday. We have hope. And just like I told Dr. Jenkins earlier today, I know I will see my TJ again one day. I know that. And so somehow as caregivers, and taking formal caregivers and taking care of our informal caregivers, we have to make sure we give them hope. So with that in mind, here's kind of the stages that Roxana and I developed as we looked at this. So a cup of cold water. When you first get that phone call or that knock at the door, or you lean into that physician's desk, you hear it, but somehow the head and the heart just aren't quite connecting, it literally takes our breath away. You, as the formal caregivers, are the front line of helping the family members feel like there is some sense of control. Because you, better than anyone, know the trajectory of their hopefully healing process. Then we move into the unprepared. You have just heard the most devastating news, like in Roxana's situation. And I remember her saying, as she was racing through this, and mind you, she couldn't get to Victor. He had been transferred to Germany when he was extracted. And her thinking, okay, how is this going to work? I have a full-time job. I've just enrolled in a PhD program. How do I do this? So just that sense of feeling very, very unprepared. Again, healthcare providers can give the best estimate to family members of what to expect in terms of recovery and to help those family members feel more in control. Then we move into a cup of bitterness. Anger begins to set in. I can honestly tell you, and even looking at Roxana's journey, thankfully for us, I believe that time was very brief. And I think we have some of our families, when I say families, I'm talking about our military caregivers, who are kind of stuck in this phase. What we found in our study, that 40% of our caregivers had an interruption in their education. Okay, already, just to be a part of the military family, there's probably been some interruptions in their either education or careers to begin with. But additionally, in our study, 54% of our population were between the ages of 36 and 55. Of that population, 57% have been caring for their veteran for more than 10 years. Additionally, 40% were caring for veterans with 4 to 5 injuries, and 91% of the veterans that they were caring for were under the age of 55. Kind of makes sense, right? That we might get a little stuck in this phase because many of our military caregivers have put their lives on hold, permanent hold. Because this isn't going to be a 5 or 6 year caregiving journey. As we've said, many of them have been doing this for now more than 10 years. This is probably going to be a 40 to 50 year caregiving journey. And many of these individuals caring for them have to put their lives on hold because they may be on suicide watch, seizure watch. So they have to be there 24/7. A cup of sorrow. This is kind of where we begin to get into the work of this. Grief is a reaction to loss. It represents our underlying sense of insecurity. It's a natural process of life. And as a process, it takes time to get through. There's no magic formula. I know we like to think it happens in 12 months. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross dispelled that myth a long time ago. But I know sometimes we kind of still think, okay, that the funeral's over and we give people a few days off from work or what, and life goes on. But for those in that grieving process, and many of our military caregivers, although their veteran may still be there physically, they're not there. It's not the same person that they kissed goodbye on the tarmac when he deployed. But the only way to avoid grief is to avoid life and live without love. And I tell people all the time, if it meant that I would have to forego being loved by TJ to avoid the pain and sorrow that I went through losing TJ, I would go through the pain and sorrow over and over again because I got to be loved by him. So it's our duty to walk with our military families through their grief process. In our survey, when we were able to ask some open-ended questions. My favorite type of research is qualitative research. I get kind of the stats thing. I'm not a real big stats person because I love the saying that statistics are numbers with the tears removed. I believe that wholeheartedly, so I love qualitative, and Roxana does too, because we believe we get the opportunity to tell a story, to be a voice for those that are involved or willing participants in our research. So when we ask the question, to what extent do you feel that you personally have lost a sense of who you are or an important part of yourself, 60% of our respondents responded with quite a bit or completely. So I'm going to kind of go through these pretty quick. So some of the, we began now the search. We have an empty cup. We try to remind our caregivers that we work with, and we do a lot in our community with them, that you can't pour from an empty cup. They have to take care of themselves. Where do they find strength in the storm? This is where I think our faith community has to step up. I don't know how many times I can tell you that I heard, and I have been guilty of saying this myself, you're in my prayers. I'll pray for you. Which is wonderful, right? There's a biblical precedent for times when prayer is not enough, though. The Bible says we should always pray and never give up. But it doesn't say anywhere that we should only pray. We have to do. We have to show this community that we are truly the hands and feet of Jesus. And Jesus did that by being with us, by being present. And we have to do that. Nourishing the soul. This is where Dr. Jenkins already mentioned, the Caregiver's Companion. Roxanna and I helped to co-author this book with our former employer, Samueli Institute. It's a great little booklet because so often, especially with our caregivers, they don't have a lot of time, so it's activities that they can do for self-care that are very quick, something they can pick up and put down and pick back up, and there's no order that they have to do things in. So it's a free PDF booklet to you, and I will be giving you the link at the end of the presentation that you can just have for your toolkit. The other reference point I would like to give you is the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, the Hidden Heroes campaign. They've done the work for us and put together all of the organizations in each state that support our military veteran caregivers. The next part is connections. It's very, very important that you get this community connected. It's a very, very isolating road. And oftentimes the veteran themselves tends to get that caregiver isolated. So it's very important to reach out, to encourage them to find things that helps to redefine them. I love what Roxanna says. She equates it to a computer that we always need an upgrade, right? We're constantly getting the upgrade. And connections helps them do that. Rethinking their purpose. And lastly, we end with a cup of comfort, which is hopeful. As I said when I started off, we have to help these individuals who feel very shattered, who feel very broken, to turn their lives into beautiful pieces of art. So we hope that the caring for the caregiver will begin with you. We believe that caring for the caregiver is the responsibility and duty of every leader, and that caring for the caregiver is everyone's concern. And you can find more about that on thehelpguide.org if you would like to have some more pieces with that. So, in closing, I would like to remind us all that each of our men and women in uniform has done something extraordinary with their lives. They have stepped out above the rest of society in character, courage, honor, and ability to serve in the cause of freedom. Many have sacrificed it all, and others live daily with the reminder of their sacrifice. So now it's our turn. As TJ's flag was handed to me, the words whispered in my ear was that this is from a grateful nation. It's our responsibility to live those words daily and to support these hidden heroes that are taking care of our most valuable treasures, our military service members. Thank you.
Thank you both, Dr. Jenkins and Dr. Peacock, for such an intimate look into the lives of those medical personnel that are dealing with individuals with serious injuries, as well as the caregivers then who provide the support and where you find your strength. We have time for perhaps one comment or question before we have lunch. Yes, please come up this way.
Well, I just have one question. My question is, Dr. Jenkins, you talked about burnout in your team, but you really didn't talk about what kinds of things you've done to help the nurses and doctors deal with that burnout. Do you just have some quick suggestions of things that you found to be helpful?
The question is that we've talked about burnout in the team, Dr. Jenkins' team, and what sorts of things have you been able to find that have been useful to those individuals?
So, in my personal experience, it is having a presence. It is going to that intensive care unit or to that emergency department when there's nothing going on, and interfacing with the folks, acknowledging what a difficult job it is that they have, and trying to address any concerns that they may have, questions that they may have. It's noticing who that individual is. One of my residents, when I first got down to San Antonio, was quite apparent that he was not doing well. He was constantly tired. He was not following through on administrative things, like just not putting an operative note in the chart in a timely fashion. Find out that after he's supposed to have been home by 9 a.m., at 5 p.m. is still in the hospital doing things. I called him up and I said, tomorrow, don't come in. I'm going to take care of all your responsibilities because there's something going on. I want to talk to you about it, but I want you to be rested so we can have that conversation. And come to find out, three children had died in a week that he had cared for, and this weighed so heavily on him. So it's recognizing those signs and the symptoms of early burnout and then acknowledging it, addressing it, not ignoring, not sugarcoating, not demanding, if you will. So I think it's really important for the leadership to see and understand this and to make concessions where one can. Perhaps this is not the patient for you to take care of today. Perhaps you should go over, to some other area for today and give this a break, until you can catch your breath. So I think that's probably the best that we can do at this point. But encourage people to seek opportunities for that. What I would say, and I have to, it's part of my job to say this, it would be a shameless endorsement of the Philoxenia House ministry in Rochester, that as Father can attest, those caregivers that come with the patients who reside in Philoxenia House get as much out of what we do as the patients do themselves. To have a home environment, a place where they can be loved and have less stress, less fear, is really important. And I see there's a continuum there, if you will, from the professional caregiver to the lay caregiver in terms of support that they need that we can provide. A little study, I pulled an article out of the Journal of Trauma Nursing looking at 12 different cases of burnout. And in only 2 of the 12 cases did the nurse who had gone through this identify that their faith was part of the answer. So 10 of 12. I think that's a horrible problem. And that in this era, that's really something that's overlooked. So I think that's a really great conference to have for all those purposes, is to get folks in the know about this problem, and to realize that these caregivers are all around us in our communities, in our parishes, in our workplace. And they all need support. They're all having a constant daily struggle with just getting through life.